So I guess we're ready to go. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. I'd like to give a warm welcome to this Medinea On Air session from Lisbon, Portugal. And as you know, Medinea On Air is an online program supported by the Erasmus Plus program. And today we have a session with a percussionist, conductor and composer, Pedro Carneiro. And so, Pedro, I give you the floor to talk about your insights about the percussion.
So good afternoon or good morning or good evening. I don't know where you all are. It's such a great pleasure to be part of this initiative. So I'll introduce myself. Thank you very much. Thank you, Pedro Moreira, for the introduction. And yes, in actual fact, I work as a conductor. Mostly these days, also a little as, of course, as a composer, writing music for theatre and dance and other media. But my first love was percussion. And it's always been very difficult to present what I do to people in general, because usually you'll be asked, what do you do? And you say, I'm a musician. And then people ask you, so what instrument do you play? And then, of course, you have this magic word, you say percussion. And of course, most people will be very confused with what percussion is. And then when you try to explain, then most people will be, of course, even more confused, because then, of course, you're starting to explain what is an infinite family of instruments that can be something that can accommodate something as a normal or simple drum, to a very complex marimba, or to a whole range of exotic instruments that go from the Indonesian gamelan to gongs from all over Asia, or anything else you might consider to be a musical instrument. So as a child, I always thought of this as something actually very distracting and very annoying, that it's very difficult to explain what you do. So briefly, and I'll just show you in actual fact these two aspects of my work as a percussionist, and I'll share my screen now so you can see sort of what I do when I hit these drums and marimbas and you name it. So I'll share with you a video that includes myself performing the marimba and a battery of other instruments, some of which are actually not instruments. So here we go. So this gives you some sort of idea of what I do, and you could possibly see some of these bizarre instruments on the background that actually include some broken cymbals from a drum set, a lid from a washing machine powder, some old frying pans that belonged to my beloved grandmother, who's unfortunately is no longer with us, that she used many, many years ago to use to fry, of course, food for us all when we were children, and some salad bowls from IKEA, and you name it. So this percussive mindset has always sort of worked as a metaphor for myself as a musician. So of course, then the best percussion setup one can imagine as a musician is the orchestra, because you have a sort of infinite assortment of instruments around you. And in one of our projects, which we work, actually, this is the building where I am now, the Portuguese Chamber Orchestra. We promote the National Youth Orchestra of Portugal. And we challenge our young musicians to think a little outside the box. And I sort of inherited this from the percussion, from the percussion and percussive thinking. So the next video is actually a performance of our youth orchestra, JOP, Jovem Orquestra Portuguesa, the National Youth Orchestra of Portugal, performing in Berlin a few years ago. I think it was in 2017. And we performed the overture to Weber's opera Der Freischütz. And we decided to perform this from memory. And so you'll see myself, of course, conducting, but you will see the musicians, the young musicians playing with the music stand turned to the audience. So let me share the screen with you so you get an idea of what this is like and the challenge that we went through, the whole orchestra, to memorize this musical work. So this gives you a sort of an idea of what it takes for the whole orchestra to memorize a new piece. And there were many challenges. There were very interesting challenges. So for the young musicians to get outside the box and perform without looking at the scores, many of them asked, where do I look now? Now that I'm not engaged, how do I relate to the other fellow musicians when I'm used to reading the music and looking at the conductor? And also the fact that many of these 80 or so young musicians had serious issues of self-trust, dealing with the fact that will I be able to memorize the score and perform it on stage, especially with the instruments that are not playing the most prominent melodic parts, like the second violins or the violas or the trumpets or the third horn or something like that. So this was a very interesting experience that I believe that I sort of inherited from the percussion world. So I prepared a small video on how a drum can be a metaphor for change. And this is a video I just recorded previously, which I'll play you now. And the idea is how one can look at a drum as a simple drum, or how one can look at a simple drum as an orchestra. So, and using that for a metaphor for change. So off we go. This is the next video. Let me share this again. Off we go. And we are at the Portuguese Chamber Orchestra's percussion room, and I'm here with my drum, which is a metaphor for problem solving and on how percussion and the percussion metaphor can help us look at problem solving in a different way. So let's look at this beautiful drum. As you can see, it's just a very normal drum. It has a top skin, bottom skin, some snares, and if I was to think, let me just pop it back. If I was to think on how to use this on a composition, I would probably feel rather limited and would choose possibly a richer instrument like a piano, a string instrument like a violin, even any sort of wind or melodic instrument that would help carve out beautiful melodies with different dynamics, but this is just a drum. So what sort of sound can I get from this drum? Okay, some different techniques, maybe a roll, but basically it's just a drum. I can add the snares, but it's always the same pitch. So that's one way of looking at it. But let me just open quickly a score I have here on the side. It's a musical score by a composer called Eugene Novotny, and he has this beautiful short snare drum piece called A Minute of News. And it's a beautiful metaphor of how we can look at an issue or a problem from a different perspective. So for this piece, he asked us to use some normal snare drumsticks, some drumsticks, and here we are, and some brushes, jazz brushes, and a softer stick. I have this beautiful white marimba stick, this beautiful soft yarn. So, and he gives us instructions on how we can expand the sonic scope of this drum, which is just a drum. Let's listen to it again. What can I do with this? And he gives us 11 different sounds, which I'll just quickly play through, and we can suddenly expand the sonic possibilities of this instrument dramatically. So the first instruction is to turn the snare on as a percussive gesture. This is the mechanical system, which you can see right here, which makes this clicking sound. So this is the first gesture, turn the snare on. Okay, so second sound is to strike the head with a brush. The third sound, to slide the brush across the head. And then use the soft mallet as the fourth sound. The fifth sound will be the rim click, which is using the body of the stick against the metal rim around it. This, of course, you can expand in different sounds using different lengths of the stick. Then you use the hand as the sixth sound, which is you form a mallet with the bottom flesh of the closed fingers and play in the center of the head. And then you have the snare off, which is the seventh sound. We'll remind you, the first sound is on, then the seventh sound, off. And then you grab the stick again for the eighth sound, which is midway between the rim and the center of the drum, this sort of singing sound, as opposed to the center, the singing sound. And then it's the ninth sound is to press the head as a sort of buzz. Then the 10th sound, you use a rim shot, which is you strike the head and the rim at the same time. Then the 11th sound is just using the shoulder of the stick right on the rim. So suddenly you have a whole symphony of sounds using this drum, 11 sounds, in which you can combine. And now off to the performance of the complete piece, just in 1 second. So, after this brief introduction on how a drum is just a drum, or perhaps a drum is a lot more than a drum, I was fascinated to see how YouTube reminded me that this last performance was actually recorded 16 years ago. It does make you think, doesn't it, how time goes fast. So in these last years as a musician, and of course working at the helm of our various orchestras and social projects here in Lisbon at the Portuguese Chamber Orchestra, we've been more and more engaged with social and outreach activities involving young disadvantaged children and adults with mental disability. And this is for the sort of last part of this presentation, what I would like to talk about. So firstly, as a percussionist, how this problem-solving mindset from this infinite family of instruments has sort of inspired me to always look at a problem from different angles. And here at our headquarters, at our wood workshop, we decided to build two copies of amadindas, which are some very large marimbas from Uganda. In order to expand the instruments we use for our contemporary music group made of adults with mental disability. So I'll firstly show you what we built. This is myself performing them, and off we go. That's it. Okay. So this was, of course, done during COVID. That's why I had the mask. And so we built these two giant xylophones to be used with the children, but especially to be used with our expanded group of adults with mental disability. Is a group called Conductors that we've created 14 years ago that uses percussion as the center of their creative scope. So these are all adults with multiple mental handicaps. And the group of the most, of course, autonomous musicians work with us weekly. We have 3 musicians from the Portuguese Chamber Orchestra, clarinet player, flute player, and a double bass player that work with them and perform with them. And they've performed internationally, and I'll actually show some of these examples. They perform nationally and internationally. They have various shows for which they use percussion as the center of their creative output. These shows are, of course, also composed using special notation developed for them and special instruments built for them, which they can, of course, feel comfortable expressing their own musical ideas. So this is a very special video in which we took the first Amadinda to Cercioeiras, which is their day center where they live. And we're supposed to be there for a couple of, I don't know, 15, 20, half an hour, 20 minutes, half an hour. And we were there for a whole morning performing with the whole community. And so this is the video from the debut of this wonderful instrument. And I'd like to point out that this is actually very cheap instrument to do. They're just basic planks of wood that are cut to a certain pitch and can be built. It's very cost effective. I'm not entirely sure now how the price, but probably a large instrument of this region that can be used by 6 people simultaneously probably costs something around 200, 250 euros. So, and built, of course, at our workshop. So here we go. From our huge fiesta in these are all disabled musicians. So all the musicians playing are, of course, disabled musicians that perform with us. And so from this idea of using percussion as a paradigm for change, and especially for social change, of course, this being acquired from years of experience dealing with contemporary composers, from avant-garde, the systems of notation, from very specific instruments that I had to design and build and develop with many composers that were looking for very specific sounds and specific notations. Our team here in the orchestra devised a special interactive notation, musical notation, which they use with these disabled musicians. And I would like to share some videos of these notations. We use some tablets, some iPads that they can use these interactive programs to interact with the music via musical shapes, which have to do with specific attacks, or with colors in which the bars of the vibraphone or different instrument are color-coded and which they can recognize to interact with the music. So let me share some of these examples with you quickly. Here we go, with some short examples. So if you look carefully at the image, you could see that the colors relate to the color code of the pitches, and then the size of the attack has to do with the dynamics. So this was something that we've optimized over the years, and these disabled musicians are able to read very quickly the group of color pitches and the dynamics. And these are parts of the compositions. When they perform, they will know that they'll have the yellow notes that belong to a certain chord pattern. And then, of course, the density, 1, 2, 3 or more attacks. And of course, the size. So they will be able to perform something very softly, very loudly, with different degrees of dynamics. And we realized that over the years, the time that these disabled musicians take to react to the images was dramatically reduced. So for some of them, they would take sometimes as long as 7 or 8 seconds to react to an image. And after a year of work, and they could react sometimes under a second. So their reaction time was immensely developed. And therefore, they are now able to perform a whole show with an interactive score. We have some further examples of this. In which they, of course, they also use the percussion paradigm. So rather than performing a cello in the normal way, we put the cello on a table, and they can perform very comfortably using the cello as a percussive or sonic instrument. So here we go. The first was Victor. Now this is Carlos. He's performing his adapted cello. As you can see, he's reacting to the score. Now back to the bow. So as you can see, he could react quickly to the changing from the bow to the mallet, in which he plays on the normal side of the strings and also on the bridge side of the string, producing different harmonics. So in a composition, they would very quickly be able to change from one texture to the other while still having the freedom to make their own musical contributions. Even with some of the deeper disabled musicians, we are still able to do some work involving timing and color coding, as in the next example. So, as you can see, he would be able to contribute to a sound texture in which you'd be able to play with different instruments and with a melodic contour. So we are running out of time, but very quickly I'll show you the end result of this work with percussion and its problem solving and its use for changing I suppose, to change society little by little or sound by sound. In 2019, the Portuguese Youth Orchestra commissioned João Godinho, a young Portuguese composer, to write a concerto for these musicians and symphony orchestra, which was performed at the Medinea Concert House in the world's largest youth orchestra festival. It's called Young Euro Classic. It's every summer in Berlin, and this composition won the Young Composer Award competition of the festival, selected as the best world premiere or new composition, and it featured our three mentors of the project and 5 of these disabled musicians playing their assortment of musical instruments, and of course at the end they unrolled this large paper rolls which had inscriptions, poems, messages of peace and harmony from the young musicians to the audience. And I'd like to show you just the very last few moments of this performance, which you can see how our special disabled musicians contributed to this wonderful composition. Here we go. Are we sure? Is it? No, it's not sharing, right? Sorry. I think you can. As you can see, our group of musicians center stage with the blue shirts. And I can no doubt tell you that this was one of the highest achievements as an artist of my entire career, to see the whole orchestra, the whole audience in tears, experiencing this incredible miracle. These disabled musicians worked for a whole year to memorize this composition, which was notated and composed by this wonderful young composer, João, and I'm very thankful that I'm always still reaching half a century of life. I'm still very confused when people ask me what I do, and I try to explain as best as I can. I presume I'm no longer a percussionist. I'm sort of a problem solver that learned with a percussion paradigm that you can always look at a problem from a different angle and you'll come out the other end a lot richer. Thank you very much.
Wow, Pedro, thank you so much. That was incredible, magnificent, very inspiring. And I welcome and I invite all of you, any of you who wants to join in this last few moments with any comments or questions, please go ahead, either by in the chat box or like raising your hands. Please join us and make sure you get advantage of having Pedro with us in these last few moments. I wonder if anybody wants to step in. Well, I guess not. So Pedro, thank you so much. This for me, it's like, of course, I know your work, but it's very, very inspiring. This whole aspect of this social inclusion aspect of your creative activity, because that's what we are talking about. It's incredibly inspiring. It's something that every musician and definitely every institution should make a central part of their activity for sure. And just to finish up, like as a musician myself, of course, the world of percussion is incredibly rich, like with these infinite possibilities of sound. But I always think of percussion in a way, it's like going back to basics, because of course rhythm is the heart of maybe a big part of music. And just to link with your early example of playing by memory, I think it has a lot to do with going back to orality and memory, which is basically how music started. So the way you put all of these aspects together, it's really, really very, very interesting. So Pedro, thank you so much. I guess we still don't have any more questions. So thank you so much, Pedro, for your very interesting presentation. Thank you, Medinea On Air. Thank you, all of you, for joining us. And please remember that these sessions are continuing right after we go to Arras and then Marseille to these final sessions of Medinea On Air. So thank you all very much and see you very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.